It's a dangerous story for this paper.
What if your boys get it wrong?
It examined the greatest crime in the history of American politics.
You guys are about to write a story that says the former Attorney General, the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in this country, is a crook.
It showed American journalism at the height of its power.
I love the idea of the fact that these guys were doing this hard work from the lowest rung of the professional ladder in their business, and that their work would lead to the takedown of the highest office of the land.
Got to get something on paper.
And it would challenge a group of filmmakers to bring the story of Watergate to the screen with truth and power, while doing justice to a seminal chapter in American history.
It's very hard today to try and explain to the audience the pressure I think we all felt. This was an important story for all of us. You very rarely get a shot at something that might be wonderful.
All the President's Men is a real story about a real event that took place, one of the big events in the history of America.
I knew that there was a held view about Hollywood making films that had to do with high offices and that they could trash it. I had to be extra diligent on being authentic and very careful on research. I spent so much time focusing on detail. The tiniest details were important.
I'm Bob Woodward of the Washington Post.
Markham.
Markham? Mr. Markham, are you here in connection with the Watergate burglary?
I'm not here.
In the summer of 1972, Robert Redford followed with interest a series of newspaper stories about the Watergate break-in. But it was the reporters behind the story that fascinated him.
I want to know who were these two guys. I was focused on the work that these two guys did that nobody else seemed to be doing. And I called Woodward in Washington. I said, look, I'd like to talk to you. I have an idea.
He was interested in the personal story of trying to figure out what happened and our quest.
At the time, the book envisioned by Woodward and Bernstein did not include themselves as characters at all.
When we sat down to write a book, the book that we started to write was not about us. It was about Watergate.
Carl Bernstein and I were going to do a standard narrative about Watergate and what happened from the perspective of the Nixon campaign and the Nixon White House.
Robert Redford had another idea.
My interest is a little different. I said, my interest is you guys and the personal, about how you guys worked.
Woodward came up to me one day and said he'd gotten a call from Redford. And I said, what the hell about? And he said, well, he thinks the story is really us. And at the time, we were still reporting the story, and we sure didn't think the story was really us.
But when Woodward and Bernstein finally did write the book, they abandoned their original concept and embraced Redford's idea. All the President's Men became the story of two young journalists fighting to uncover the truth.
It was helpful to me to hear him say that, and in the end, we wound up writing All the President's Men as a reporting story. He laid the seed for that in that first phone call.
As a storyteller, Redford was immediately attracted to the differences between the two lead characters.
One guy was a WASP, the other guy was a Jew. One guy was a Republican, the other guy was a radical liberal. They didn't really care for each other, but they had to work together. And I thought, now that dynamic is character-driven, and I like that. I'm fascinated. What do these guys do under those conditions?
The next step was to enlist the cooperation of the Washington Post, in particular the newspaper's legendary editor, Ben Bradlee.
I ran against an obstacle from the Post because the Post was starstruck, but at the same time they were dubious and skeptical and wanted to hedge their bets of us being there because it could be Hollywood crap.
They wanted to film it down in the newsroom. And they said, we're going to use all of your names, and they're going to use the Post name, and then we'd like to film it in the newsroom. I was appalled. I thought that would be incredibly disruptive.
Bradlee was a tricky, very smart, I like him a lot, but he's tough. He's very plain and outspoken, very confident, very charismatic. But I ended up with a really good relationship with him. He was very helpful.
I was terrified because you knew that everybody who was going to talk about this film had at one time or another been in a newsroom. Every power on television, they all began in newsrooms, and we knew if we Hollywooded it up, we would be in terrible trouble.
Our fears, and certainly mine, were that it would become a Hollywood production number and it wouldn't be the truth.
The worst thing, by the time the movie got around to actually happening, was all anybody would say to me was, gee, don't you think we all know enough about Watergate? So how do you make people know you don't know the whole story?
I still didn't shift from the idea that the movie should only go to the point where it became widely known, that it was the story underneath the story.
In shaping the script, screenwriter William Goldman and producer Robert Redford made their starting point the two characters who would drive the story.
Woodward was at that time, I think 29, a Yale graduate, thought he wanted a report, and I think he was the lowest paid person on the Washington Post at this time.
Who's Charles Colson?
You know, I'm glad you asked me that question. The reason I'm glad you asked me is because if you had asked Simons or Bradley, they would have said, you know, we're going to have to fire this schmuck at once because he's so dumb.
And Bernstein had been around newspapers, but he was no blazing genius going on to glory. They were these two schlubs who did this phenomenal, brilliant, dogged work on this story and helped break it.
Harry, I know somebody on the staff over Watergate. You want me to work with
Bernstein, why don't you finish one story before trying to get on another?
I finished.
The Virginia legislature story?
I finished it.
All right, give it to me.
I'm just polishing it. I'll work the phone.
Polishing it. Yeah, you work the phone.
To ensure the truthfulness of the story, the filmmakers relied on the journalists who had lived it.
Goldman took me to a hotel room when he started working on the screenplay, and he said, now don't look at notes, don't look at the book, just talk.
So some of that stuff is almost verbatim, you know, reshaped possibly a little bit to make it more filmic, but it was verbatim about what they actually experienced, because they kept records of everything.
Woodward was a fabulous help to me. What was tricky was the story, trying to make the story hold. It wasn't like you have tremendous swordplay when the movie gets boring. This was just two guys plodding along.
With the screenplay underway, Redford began to approach studio executives with the idea of turning All the President's Men into a feature film.
And the whole movie was risky. Nobody had any idea the movie would work. These two guys essentially did the same thing over and over. They go knock on your door and say, hello, we're Woodward and Bernstein, can we talk to you? A lot of people said no. No major studio makes this kind of movie. They don't want to. If you ask the executives, everybody knew the story. Oh my God, Watergate, yuck. They don't want to hear that anymore.
The studio that bid for it was Warner Brothers. But then they said, look, we had to pay so much for the book, you got to be in it. And so that led to my being in it, which I did not plan to do.
But I think he felt if he went with an unknown in the other part, the balance of the movie would have been screwed up.
I was at a Knicks game in New York, and Redford was there, and he leaned over, and he said, do you want to play Carl Bernstein?
There was something about Dustin. I knew him a little bit. We were both Knicks fans. What I knew about him was this nervous energy, very, very perfectionist and neurotic and funny and smart, and put all that into his work.
These are the notes?
Yeah, I got stuff on napkins, match because I'm writing in the bathroom while she's getting the coffee. I'm a walking litter basket.
Could you give me something I can get down?
It's rare when you get a chance to do a movie that's based on a real person. And it's even rarer when you get a chance to play someone where the screenplay's coming from a book, because it tends to be more layered and richer.
An added bonus for the actors was the opportunity to spend time with the real-life people they would be playing on screen.
First thing I wanted to do was meet Carl Bernstein. He invited me to his parents' house for Seder.
Those guys pretty much lived with us for a number of months.
We did get to know each other very well. I liked him. He was charming. He looked New York, but he didn't sound it. It sounded almost like a Southern accent.
I gave him my wallet, as I remember, and he used my wallet. But also, I gave him my watch that I wore during Watergate, which was a high school graduation present.
Dustin was extraordinary. He could imitate anybody. He could call up Woodward posing as Bernstein and have a conversation with him.
What I learned is that Woodward was the didactic one. A leads to B, B leads to C, and you get confirmation on two sources for each one, and Carl was the opposite. A goes to B, and then F, and then L. And at times it may have driven Woodward crazy, but he turned out to be right. He just made leaps.
I think you have some idea what's in the papers when the former Attorney General comes into the office when it's taking place at the committee to re-elect, and he's got a raincoat over his head. Why is he wearing a raincoat?
It could be raining is what could happen.
And I moved to Washington, D.C. before the film started, and I went to the Washington Post every day. I met the people. I hung out there. I was there for about 2-3 months. I didn't want to leave.
Dustin was fantastic. I remember there was a jumper and a couple of blocks away. A guy was going to leap off a building, and asking him if he'd like to go watch that. And I went with him, and a bunch of us went. And he disrupted the whole thing because people recognized him, and they looked at him and not the poor guy that was trying to jump, who didn't jump.
My character was entirely different because on the surface, Bob appeared to be just perfect. You just knew his lawn was cut, and there was really careful, slower speech, well thought out, very humble, very polite. Finally, what I came to the conclusion of was that he was a man of just sheer hard work. He was obsessed with hard work, but that the exterior of him, which probably came from his Middle West background and being a Republican by party, might hide some other thing. And what I concluded was the thing that was submerged was a killer instinct. He would not let Bernstein get ahead with an assumption, and that was tension. But that was also Woodward's way of making sure when he got down to the moment, he could put the knife in the right way, and it would get results.
What else did he say? He didn't say anything. Come on, you're hedging. Do you think he said it to impress you, to try to get you to go to bed with him? Jesus. No, I want to hear her say it. Do you think he said that to impress you, to try to get you to go to bed with him? Why did it take you 2 weeks to tell us this, Sally?
I guess I don't have the taste for the jugular you guys have.
After serving as the producer of the film for more than 2 years, Robert Redford began to look for the right man to share the burden of bringing the film to life.
I really felt at that time there had to be a partner. I wanted a director that had a classy sensibility. I wanted to portray the villains as people who, from their point of view, had rational thinking, and some of them weren't bad people. And I had Pakula on my mind. I mean, clearly in our first meeting, it was something that was going to captivate his interest.
Alan was there to do something. I don't think it was a matter of conscious control. There was something motivating him.
He felt that it had to be completely rethought and kind of restructured, and so we did that together.
Here's where Pakula was one of the many ways in which he was my kind of director. He allowed us to make phone calls, and we'd both come back from our sources. My source was, Bernstein. His was, and he says, well, Bob says this about what happened. I said, that's not what Carl says. Carl says this, but the energy of it would always provide something for what we were shooting that day. Because even though the script was written, it was constantly morphing into something else, which I think is what a script should do. Because at some point, you shoot the film, you don't shoot the script. And when you're on the front line with it, there's a whole new life that starts to happen. And good directors, I think, go with it.
Alan Pakula understood journalism, he understood journalists, he understood me, Bernstein, Woodward. He spent an enormous amount of time with us.
We had great fun because he had a great sense of humor. And he loved the psychology of it. He said, I love Dustin. He's the only oral anal compulsive. he's got it going both ways. That's what he said. Because Dustin was like amazing energy and amazing challenge and how come and why. And he's always eating something. And so Pakula just loved it. He loved the differences between Dustin and I and the characters.
Pakula once took me out for dinner, a man who I really loved, just to have dinner with me and look me right in the eye and at a certain point say, is there anything that you want from me as a director as we start this adventure? And I thought it was such a sweet thing to say. I mean, directors don't usually say that. And I looked at him, I said, do you want the first thing that came into my mind? He said, yes. I says, make me look handsomer than Bob. And he laughed, and then I knew we were going to get along.
To bring the shadowy world of Watergate to the screen, Redford and Pakula called on the legendary cinematographer of such films as The Godfather.
Gordon Willis was Alan's choice because he had worked with him.
I met Alan early on, and I think he'd done one movie or possibly two. And he came to New York to do Clute. That worked out extremely well for everybody. I made myself available for him to shoot. It was Clute and All the President's Men and Parallax View. These were all good movies, in my opinion, and very intelligent guy, and his material was always good.
For Alan and I, we would sit and talk a lot about design, and that was fun. Alan could communicate that intellectually, but it had to be translated professionally and artistically. And then Gordon would put an extra spin on it.
It wasn't like one look is worth 1,000 words kind of movie. It was one look had to be 1,000 words. You were delivering information all the time. And structuring the visual framework for this movie, you had to do one, deliver information, make it interesting, not go over the top with a lot of aesthetics. I sort of hung the visuals on this poster art kind of feeling in the Washington Post, you know, the blue, white, this fluorescent thing. So there was a lot of juxtaposition of imagery. So you were there, then you were in the garage.
Gordon Willis, who was amiably called by Hollywood the Prince of Darkness, because he was one of the first cinematographers not to light the eyes in the old Hollywood way, but to keep a lot of stuff in darkness. In fact, one time a makeup person was tamping, was trying to get the sweat off, and he was saying, "Leave it on, that's what I'm lighting them with." It's the reflection of the sweat.
I believe in relativity, actually, and visual structure, and telling a story in a movie. And light to dark, dark to light, big to small, small to big. And that same philosophy would apply in President's Men. And there's two shots, one in the Library of Congress where we start on these two people and pull back, and they become little people in a huge sea of books and information. And then we did it again when they're in this car trying to find out these addresses.
And then as the camera would pull back, it'd go into a helicopter shot of the entire city to show these guys are just two little characters in this massive sea of stuff.
And it was the same premise, needle in a haystack, finding this information.
The only time you really saw real light was when you were in the newsroom, but it was also completely sterile light. It was without dimensions. It was just flat, fluorescent, harsh light, which was exactly reflective of the harsh, tough news that had to be found to lead people to the light in the newsroom. The newsroom is where the light was going to be found, and once they left there, they're in the dark.
So you take an obvious idea and apply it in a simple way, and it always works, in my opinion.
Gordon was one of those cinematographers, and I've only worked with a few who do this, who look at you to capture every single angle in their mind of what is right and best for you and what is interesting.
I believe that one of the reasons the movie works is because Gordon Willis's camera work was so brilliant. He was so important for this movie because of the paranoia that is there.
The other thing that I had discussed with Alan prior to that, I said, well, you know, it's really a deep focus movie. I said, you want to see what's going on front and back all the time. There's one shot of Redford talking on the phone, and we keep moving in and moving in and moving on. He's talking, and in the background, you can see all these people around the TV sets, etc. So I had some systems built for the camera, which was literally a sliding diopter system, so we could get more depth. And we used it a lot in the newsroom.
Background, action.
Woodward! Unable to shoot in the Washington Post's actual newsroom, the filmmakers spared no expense to recreate the location on Warner Brothers' Burbank soundstage.
They took two sound stages at Warner's, and they broke the wall, and they used both sound stages for the Washington Post, which is what gave it the depth.
George Jenkins, the production designer, and his whole staff went in there, and they itemized every single item in that entire newsroom.
They took trash from the Post newsroom wastebaskets and sent it out to California to give it an authenticity.
So that no one would say, oh, it's phony and has the LA Times there or whatever it is. It was all Washington Post garbage.
It was quite extraordinary to see the newsroom of the Washington Post in Hollywood.
Casting a film filled with rich characters drawn from real life was an extraordinary challenge.
Everyone who came on board took their part, no matter how small, very seriously. And they gave a lot, and that meant a lot to me. Of course, Bradley was a special deal because of my relationship with Jason Robards.
Stick it inside someplace.
This is a goddamn important story.
Get some harder information next time.
I felt right from the get-go he was Bradley, and Alan agreed.
For the pivotal role of Judy Hoback, the bookkeeper for the committee to re-elect the president, the producers turned to veteran stage actress Jane Alexander.
Her role was so important in the story, and that required an actress of enormous sensitivity and intelligence to play someone who was afraid, but you knew wanted to say something, but was scared to death to say it.
I walked in. It was a very hot day, I believe in July, when we were shooting. And I had on just this summer dress. And Alan said, "Oh, you look great. Come on, let's start." I said, "No, Alan, I have to go get makeup and I have to do my hair and I have to put on my costume." He said, "No, you look great. This is how we're going to do it."
She came on the set extremely prepared and then allowed herself to be naked. And it was extremely vulnerable. She allowed that to happen to her.
Dustin loves to improvise. And I do too. I was very happy that early in my career, improvisation was a really mainstay of my work in the theater.
She caught the wind, and she knew we were there to, to make each other as good as possible.
I loved working with Dustin. You got to be on your toes because he's going to throw you something different all the time, particularly off camera. If Dustin's off camera and say it's my close-up, watch out because he'll throw me something that is totally out of the blue. Like he'll just say, "What did you have for breakfast?" "Who?" And then you're supposed to respond with the lines. So it's a lot of fun, but also a little nerve-wracking sometimes to work with Dustin. But that scene, it worked like gangbusters.
Is there any evidence that any of Mr. Mitchell's assistants were part of this?
Well, I can't say that it would positively prove that they planned the break-in, but it would come pretty close.
As Redford and Hoffman became immersed in their roles, they began to emulate the interplay between the men they were portraying.
Redford said one of the most brilliant things to me, and I don't like to give a good-looking guy a non-Jew credit, but he said, "I think we should memorize not only our own lines, but I think we should memorize each other's lines." He says, "Because I think we should interrupt each other. If I start to say a question, if you know my line, you'll finish it." I said, "In other words, the two of us are one person." He says, "That's right." That meant that the actors, whomever it was, got stunned. And we kept them off center. And they loved it. At first, maybe they didn't, but they understood what we were doing.
Please leave before they see you.
Who did you mean by... What do you mean, they? Could you give us their names?
You know, I really can't talk about this because...
Would they be members of the committee?
And Pakula embraced it, and very few directors would have embraced that.
Alan Pakula was just wonderful to work with, wonderful with actors.
Alan Pakula presented us every day with an opportunity to get everything there was to get out of a scene.
For the role of Deep Throat, there was only one actor considered.
Forget the myths that the media's created about the White House. The truth is, these are not very bright guys, and things got out of hand.
Al was a personal friend. I'd known him for years, and I just felt, and so did Alan, that he was the perfect guy. One, that Deep Throat should not be a mustache twirler. I thought he should have dignity. I thought he should be portrayed as somebody who was tortured and had a lot of integrity and was up against the edge of betrayal of his profession, and that he wanted to save the FBI because he was convinced that Nixon was out to do it in, which I think, by the way, was true. This gang surveyed people and tailed people and bugged phones, wiretapped, that he was in constant danger, which put the fear into him, which put the fear into Woodward.
The meetings and the transactions with Felt were frightening. To go into an underground parking garage at 2 a.m. in the morning, when it's empty, when it's dangerous, when your paranoia seizes you, as it did me. You don't worry about the strangeness and the oddity. What you worry about is some way to protect your own ass.
You knew you had to make the garage a villain. You had to make the garage a scary cavern to walk into where anything could happen. You had to almost feel it. It had to be palpable in the shadows. You had to feel something in the shadows could just like that jump out. It had to be quiet, so you would hear just like dripping condensation drips from pipes in the empty garage at night. And it gets quieter and quieter, and then suddenly it should just make you jump out of your seat.
In the end, the filmmakers' efforts to bring all the President's Men to the screen met with critical and commercial success.
You can't do better work than that. To make a story come alive and have that much dramatic tension in it, in which the world knew the ending.
Still, when you look at the movie, it's a very dynamic movie. So that was the challenge. Not to do something flashy, but to do something interesting.
It was an extraordinary experience to shoot. I still remember it vividly.
It was a golden experience, and we didn't know it as we were doing it.
The film also lives as part of the enduring legacy of director Alan J. Pakula.
This movie is a tribute to a great, great director who understood the historic aspects of Watergate and who understood that there was a lot riding on this movie, that it would affect the institution of the Washington Post, the way our business was viewed.
He was. Unfortunately, he died young. An amazing director with enormous capacity for filmic vision. I really think he made some of the great movies, and All the President's Men is the greatest, probably.
Perhaps most important of all, the filmmakers succeeded in capturing the truth of the story.
Redford, to his credit, was absolutely dedicated to following what had really happened.
I think that the movie represented what was going on in the Washington Post in pursuit of that story. I thought that it was remarkably accurate.
I think the film not only captures authentically the story, but it captures what that kind of journalism is like. You operate in a world of doubt, and that you have to be doubtful yourself of what people are saying.
When it was over, I felt it was a real accomplishment because I had felt that we had honored the newspaper business by showing how hard the work was. When I showed the film at Sundance at their request, and I saw the reaction of the audience, how they were impressed and amazed that, God, I didn't know that, I didn't know that. And then you realize half the people in the room were born after Watergate. It is 30 years ago. And I thought, wow. I've been getting letters from people saying they're showing the film in their classes, and it has a huge impact because students didn't know. And then they're able to draw the parallels between today and then. It's got an educational component now that has relevance.
I can't think of another major American political movie.
There's a combined legacy from the book and the film. Both have become part of the culture.
What's Jane?
I really believe that Alan Pakula elevated it to a very exciting piece of movie making.
Good God. Just